So in the last video, I explained one of the challenges with thinking about your stories with this simple simple way of thinking about three-act structure. And although three-act structure, as I explained in that video, it does accurately represent on a very simplistic way what is happening in stories, the truth is stories are far more complex than what three-act structure presents. So yes, it's accurate to think about and deconstruct stories in a way that could be three acts, but the truth is there is more complexity, and the complexity is not resolved when you say, well, it's 4 acts or 6 acts or 12 acts, because the complexity of great stories is not in terms of the sequential order of events, is what structure is. Structure describes the sequential order of events, and that's not where the complexity is. The complexity of structure is in the layering of the story, that there's multiple stories taking place at the same time, that there are multiple characters interacting at the same time, that there are multiple situations impacting your character and characters at the same time. And of course, there are thematic ideas, the deeply rooted why of the story. And not just a single thematic idea, but multiple thematic ideas. In fact, they're opposing ideas that are at least 2 thematically deep and rich and relevant thematic ideas that oppose each other, that are putting pressure on your main character and other characters, that are presenting a point of view that are contrary to each other. So when we think about all that in terms of structure, structure in a simple timeline is not sufficient. So how do we resolve this? So here is my software, plot control. Now plot control, this software is extraordinarily unique. It's a deep tool, it's a powerful tool of story construction, of helping a writer think about all of the complexity of everything going on in story, not just the structure. Here's structure within my software. We've got Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. This is a sample project that I always like to open up when I do training videos and whatnot. That's why it's got already some more data, and you can see you can add additional acts within the software. This is not a demo of the software, but the main 3 acts that are default, you've got Act 1, and again, you've opening scene, introduction, ordinary world and introduction, problem, opportunity, solutions and escalation, a critical part of a story. Maybe we'll talk about a little more. And then a complication or journey ends Act 1, segues in Act 2. Act 2, then within the software, you can see pursuit of solution, the success or failure moment, that's your midpoint, that's that sequence that leads to your midpoint of your story, despair and transformation, then ultimately a discovery, as I explained in the other video. There's always some new revelation, new information that comes to the surface, and that new information is what really enables a meaningful climax. It allows your protagonist, your main character, to engage the story and the situation taking place in such a way that the story can have a meaningful and relevant climax. And of course, you've got reversals. That's what that discovery, that revelation does, leads to a climax resolution and end scene. Now, what really makes this software unique is not the built-in structure, because as I've been saying, thinking about the structure is thinking about when things happen. This is all when things need to happen. Yes, notice right away it's what is happening. So if we jump just to back to Act 1, what my structure, what I call the simple story timeline does, is right away it gets you out of thinking about like the inciting incident. Well, what is the inciting incident? What is an inciting incident? What is a catalyst? Right? What you really have is a problem or opportunity. You've got your main character, they're the ordinary world and introduction, they're living their life, they're going through their reality, they segue from some kind of past situation into the now of the story you're telling. And that now of the story you're telling is introduced, all the relevant, important parts of that main character, and then they encounter a problem or opportunity. Now that problem or opportunity comes from a second story. There's always a second parallel. I've explained this in other videos. There's always a second parallel story that is happening before your story. So imagine, I'm going to try and do this. This is where your story begins, right? Opening scene. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about a novel or we're talking about a movie, but imagine right here is the opening scene, right? In the past, before this opening scene, you've got your main character's reality. In my system, in your storytelling potential, we call this reality the B story, not to be confused with subplots. But you've got this reality moving through time into the present now. Now, something uniquely extraordinary is about to happen to that main character. First of all, they have to be uniquely extraordinary in their own right. And usually that B story carries with it something unbelievable that's already happening. And a lot of writers make the mistake of thinking that thing that's already happening with that main character, with that protagonist that's flowing into the now, that's the story. And that's not. And I've done other videos that explain that you always need the second story that we call the proximate cause. And so you've got now this B story, the main character's ongoing reality, flowing into the story here. But you also have a second thing happening. And that is the A story, what we call the proximate cause. And I'm not going to talk in detail about the proximate cause in this video. But what we have is the proximate cause flows into the now also. Two things. So the example I love to use is think about the movie Armageddon, because it's the simplistic idea of what is going on. You've got this massive asteroid there. This massive asteroid's coming towards the Earth. And all of a sudden here, NASA, opening scene, NASA sees, oh my gosh, there's a giant asteroid about to hit the Earth. We need to do something about it. Notice, this is not the inciting incident. Now, there are a ton of experts. And I like to give the warning about like certain things you should look for in an expert. If they talk about specifically Armageddon, and they say the asteroid is the arrival of the asteroid, or the knowledge of the asteroid is the inciting incident, this is an absolutely incorrect way to think about storytelling. And they're stuck in that simple 3-act structure. We need to understand stories are more complex than the 3-act structure. Because what's happening is you've got this massive asteroid is about to hit Earth. NASA finds out what's going on. Now, that's the A story being introduced. The ordinary world, an introduction to that A story, has its own past. The NASA guys, the Billy Bob Thornton character in that movie, I think his name is Dan Truman. I'm pretty sure it's Dan Truman in the movie because I've done it so many times with this example. But it's Billy Bob Thornton, right? He's in charge of NASA, and he says, well, what are you going to do? Well, what we have to do, we haven't introduced the main character yet, by the way. The main character is not introduced. The Bruce Willis character who's going to come in over here, he's not introduced yet. They say, well, what are we going to do? It's going to hit Earth. It's going to destroy all of life on Earth, a complete reset. Well, the plan is we need to send a team to the asteroid, dig a hole deep enough, put a nuclear bomb in there, blow it up, split it in half so it misses Earth. The two halves will go separate, and we've got a certain amount of time to do that. Well, who are we going to do? Well, we need to get the best driller on the planet. And that happens to be a guy who also has a reality now coming into now. Unrelated to the asteroid, unrelated to NASA. You see what's going on? He has no relationship at all to any of that. But he can drill a hole. And here now we introduce him, the B story, and that comes in over here. And his story is, again, nothing to do with what's going on with NASA or the asteroid. He's out in the middle of nowhere, and he's got his own life with his oil rig, and he's got a problem with one of his workers and his own daughter having a relationship. And then the NASA guys show up and say, we need you to come with us. You know what that is? That is the inciting incident. That happens here. So the inciting incident is not the asteroid. I hope you see this. Experts who call the asteroid the inciting incidents are making a fundamental error because they're stuck with a very simplistic understanding of story progression and story complexity. Rather, you've got the situation with the asteroid, NASA, and then you've got the Bruce Willis situation with the oil riggers. Two stories, and they collide. So now, and then it moves forward. They move forward together. Now, how do you think about this complexity if thinking about it on a timeline makes it so limiting? So this is the power of this software. So if we back up and we can jump over to plots, and this is an image I showed you in that last video, we've got what we call the core elements. So there's 12 core elements. The truth is, when I first created this software, going back to about 2010, I only had 8 core elements. When I first created the whole concept of the A story, the B story, it was really the character and the story. This was combined. I really expanded the concepts and information over the years. And it's so powerful. And then with the power of the software is you get to go to the Start Here area. And these questions, you can see here's the A story, proximate cause questions. And there are 8. And then there are another 7 questions about the underlying cause or the B story, right? What's going on in the main character's life. And then structure has its own 12 questions. And then the thematic layer, which you cannot ignore because there's something called in storytelling the deeply rooted why, the reason things are happening. And obviously the reason that Armageddon is happening is because there's a giant asteroid headed towards Earth. That I concede. But the reason that the main characters are relevant, the reason that they're using these main characters and not someone else, right? This is the deeply rooted why of the story. That's thematically related. And all great dialogue, the idea of subtext, which is horrifically misunderstood, it's all because of theme. Great dialogue is rooted in theme. And when you root your dialogue in theme, subtext follows automatically. So please, any expert who describes subtext like this, subtext is when your characters say one thing, it means something else. Look, characters are great characters say exactly what they mean, unless they're like a psychopathic liar. So if your character who's saying something but means something else is intentionally lying, yeah, they might speak like that. But otherwise, characters say what they mean. They're trying to express accurately what they want to say. Subtext is that it's layered with thematic richness, not a character lying. And any expert, and there are many out there who describe subtext as they say one thing and they mean something else, that is a massive, major, absolute red flag. I have no problem saying it. If an expert describes subtext specifically on the subject of subtext that way, please move on. You don't have to listen to me. You don't have to pay attention to me. But that person who would describe subtext in that way is not to be followed, and their expertise is an absolute false. They're a false front. They're just regurgitating the same old information taught by other people who don't know what they're talking about. But getting back to this power of the software. So when you fill in these questions, it literally propagates forward. The software then understands that certain answers, I never filled in any of this. I was just, as a demonstration, I was filling in start here questions, and it fills in the core elements. But what we see here with the core elements is when we were looking at the acts, we were looking at when things happen. That's what structure is, when things need to happen. But what structure does, classic structure, is it conflates when and what. The inciting incident is both when something needs to happen and what needs to happen. So you as a writer building stories are stuck thinking in this very narrow way about your story. Well, I need the inciting incident. And then what we really see in great stories is that there are two, because you've got the A story with the arrival of the asteroid. That's their inciting incident. And then you've got the B story with the arrival of NASA. That's the main character's inciting incident. You see, in all great stories, if you really pay attention, what we would call, I call it the problem or opportunity, but just to use the language that's used, there's always two inciting incidents. One that applies to that A story, and then one applies to the main character in the B story. It's a critical idea. And what these core elements allow you to do is think about all the whats. Here you think about all the B story components of what's going on, what we call the underlying cause. What's happening in the life of your main character? In the case, first of all, you have the main character himself. And then you've got, in the case of the Bruce Willis character, in Armageddon, he's got his daughter is having a relationship with one of his workers. That's what's going on. That's the explosion in his own reality that's taking place as the story flows into the now. Then there's understanding the character, and then is understanding that A story. Understanding that there is a giant asteroid that's unrelated to him. Understanding that asteroid has to do with NASA. It's what we call the proximate cause. And then that proximate cause is a proximate cause character, the Billy Bob Thornton character. And then down here we have the theme to think through the entire thematic layer correctly. And then once you think through all this stuff, then you can start to construct your story on the timeline. And again, some other incredible features of this software, it's just so powerful. Think about all your characters and build up all the different characters and relationships that are important, and even write your screenplays. Specifically, this is for screenwriting, plot control within the software. And there is software I also sell called chapter control, which I'm not talking about that specifically right now, but fundamentally the story building component is the same, but allows you to then think through rather than you build up your big acts, but then you can think through each individual chapter or like chunks of your story, and then the drafts, rather than being screenplay specific, is you can use built-in just plain word editor. But this is a very powerful way. Again, the way to really think through stories better is not to get stuck thinking about when things happen, but rather to use what we call the core elements and think about what happens. The core elements are all about letting you think about what happens. And then, once you know what happens, well, then when do those things need to happen?